So, heard an awesome lesson that I'd love to share, and it relates around focus. And the theme was a lady talking to her husband, and he's like, "Man, do I thrive during a crisis." She's like, "I know you do. I totally trust you. Like, you know how to step up and thrive during a crisis. Like, not only do you thrive, you thrive." And I noticed that was like at least true for my life. Maybe a lot of times we can get complacent, like when things go well, we're sitting there and things get complacent. But when things go hard, like during the hard economic downturns, during the hard times in life, that's when we really focus. And I believe that one of the reasons why I'm feeling at such a good place in almost like every area of my life now, and I have the momentum, was the amount of focus that I put into all those areas of my life just because I was feeling that I was in crisis during all those. And her point is, well, what if you also focus during pre-crisis? What if instead of waiting until the crisis happened to not only being the focused work, but also really focused on the mindset? And one of the things that has gotten me to having a very positive well-being and energy, aka joy, aka happiness, aka good emotional state, is the focus for so long that I've put into those habits to create that. Whether if it's the meditation, studying Gary Brecka and Tim Ferriss in The Body, which what I've learned and I truly believe in is the physiological is probably an 80% or more driver on the psychological. And what if during the times while things are starting to go well, maybe we're like a 5, rate ourselves a 5 to 10 out of 10, and we got that momentum. How else can we be focusing on the beautiful things that are there? And one of those areas that have helped me get into this great state is just awareness. You know, call it awareness, call it meditation, call it all day. Just being able to catch yourself in your mental shit or street that's going towards a dead end that isn't going to serve you. How much emphasis and focus I was putting on just towards watching that and catching it, so that instead of going down this exit, I could at least go down this exit, at least for a little while. I get that both streets in the world exist, but what can I do to be in this lane, in this street, at least just a little bit longer than this street? And if I can just get 1% over there into the right street rather than the off street, even if it's 1% a week, the changes have been pretty radical. So while we are feeling good, or we have the good momentum, or the money's flowing, or the relationship is like prospering and all of a sudden we're in it, what if we kept focusing in the pre-crisis? Because if we are in a healthy momentum, in this moment, I think of it like the avalanche. Like, isn't it awesome that when you're in momentum, like an avalanche, that once it gets going, it becomes very easy to almost keep the momentum going. It's like the flow's going, it's moving. What is it, a law of physics? Objects of motion tend to stay in motion, and that's probably include your joy, your emotional well-being, your money, your dating, your giving back to the world, the relationships, your fun. Like literally any of those objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So while you're not in crisis, while I'm not in crisis, I'm noticing that I'm picking up so much momentum that I'm starting to rank days even higher than 10. I'm like, these days, some of these days are turning into 12 out of 10, 13 out of 10. And it's getting me to a new paradigm to where today's 10 is, next month's 8. And a lot of that is from focusing during this time when I'm in pre-crisis and almost like out of crisis, because it's coming. And if you're an avalanche and you know a crisis is coming, because it's always coming, it's always coming. Like, for the people to come out of the crises, whether if it's the COVID or a real estate crash or a .com boost or like these relationships ended, like where I've seen people stuck as an individual unit, or even like as the country, which I believe as the country is where we're failing ourselves as the individual unit, is how dumb we fucking are at not learning the lesson. Like, do you really think another crisis isn't coming? Like, do you really think something isn't right around the corner? Like, do you really think winter is not going to ever happen again? Though it always happens, right? Like, do you really think winter is not coming? And what would it be like to go up against the wall of winter with a powerful avalanche of your own, having that force, having that momentum, having that flow, versus just being cruising in stride, pedaling, not pedaling downhill, just being in emotion. I mean, imagine, because momentum always moves itself forward and is always going into the future, that momentum that you even chose to focus more on, even though it might have a setback, is still going to carry forward into the next crisis and through it. Even the lost momentum almost becomes permanently lost into the momentum that you could have had forward. It's like always having your net worth the same. It's always like always making the same money. It's like always like being in the same relationships. It's always like, always being at the same place. And, if you're not growing or dying, it's like inflation, I don't think is just monetary. Like, we have to beat inflation. That's why if you're not growing your income, you're dying, right? Like, you literally could be losing another 5% a year. Isn't that the same thing emotionally, financially, relationally, giving back? Like, if you aren't growing more than that 10 to 20% every year, your net is definitely going down. If you're here and you're at zero and you're maintaining, you're definitely losing at least 10 to 20% of momentum every single year. And where you're at, because the world's growing, life's growing, new knowledge is coming out, new technologies, new joys, things we get to experience, right? And if we don't get to educate and integrate that into ourselves with the momentum of the learning to bring it into their lives, then we don't have it. Like, inflation is definitively more than monetary. So, in order to beat that, the greatest opportunity that we have is, while we are in a momentum state and a great state, isn't that such an incredible time to focus? Because we can get from 8th to 9th gear, and between 8 and 9 is so much more powerful, and going from 9 to 10 is easier, but you can generate so much more power and ease to getting there. And each number that you go up in those areas of life is going to be not linear, but exponential. It's almost like the earthquake scale. What is that called? The Richter scale, where a 2 isn't 2 times as strong as a 1. I think it's something like 10 times as strong. I could be off, but and a 3 isn't like 3 times as strong as a 1, or just like 1.5 as much as a 2. It's actually like 5 to 10 times more stronger than a 2, and a 4 is 5 to 10 times stronger than a 3. So it's not a linear scale. It's this exponential flow that's there. So each time you have that momentum, when you're in pre-crisis, when you're really flowing, and you can take that opportunity on your avalanche and your earthquake power to go from the 8 on the Richter scale to the 9, it ain't linear. It's exponential. And why not take that exponential power? Because what if the difference between, let's say, that 6 and the 8 is like to the 10th and to the 10th? You know, what if you truly did have 50 to 100 times more inertia going into the next crisis, emotionally, financially, relationally, giving back, friends, your home? That's where that power comes in. And that's how I think the lesson really relates. If you are really focusing during the pre-crisis, oh my God, the momentum that you can get with yourself and with the other people becomes astronomical. So when that skyscraper falls again, because it always will fall, and sometimes it's harder, because when your next skyscraper falls, it's normally a bigger building. You know, maybe you come out of that relationship, maybe you come out of that business loss, maybe you come out of those other things. Like in my experience, I could feel things getting exponential in all areas of my life. And when all of a sudden you fall and you're at a bigger place, it's a much harder fall. There's a huge difference between losing, you know, a $500,000 company and like a $5 million company. There's a huge difference between being in a relationship, you know, for a year or two when you're 30 versus a year or two when you're like 40, right? They're much deeper. They're much more profound. Those losses become much deeper. And hopefully when that skyscraper breaks and it falls, that you have much more time because you're in a much bigger building and you have more parachutes around you because you've had so much inertia because you focused during that pre-crisis. And what's great about it is while you're in pre-crisis, in my experience, it is way easier to maintain an 8 to a 10 level and get there compared to try to getting to like a 5 level when in the middle of crisis. Like it's almost like so much easier to get there. It takes so much less energy and resources, so much less gas in the tank, so much less fuel to burn because that plane's already just up and rocking. And it's almost easier to turn on the hyperspeed and to go from there. So what if maybe in that paradigm rule, the 80-20 rule, what if 80% of our power and all the things that we are building and the momentum carry forward in life, what if it was from the 20% of the time that we spent from our focus in creating inertia before the crisis actually hit? Because that's where most of the inertia can be developed.